Hey everyone, my name is Nathan Pay, and welcome to another episode of Blu Ocean Crypto. Thanks for joining us today, Miles. Always a pleasure. Yeah, there's been a lot of news going on in the last couple weeks.
A lot of whispers
in the industry, so I thought it would be good for us today to kind of talk about some of those things. I'm sure a lot of people watching have kind of seen some of it, and maybe you haven't. Now, of course, I need to preface nothing we talk about today is financial advice, and we are by no means experts on any of these individual topics. A lot of this is just our opinion, but I definitely hope you all find it useful. So let's start with some of the fun stuff first. Pokemon.
Yeah,
So
we love Pokemon.
We know now that Pokemon is hiring blockchain developers and moving into the NFT space. And
Yes,
I mean,
this
my
is an
mind
exciting
is
piece
just
of news for me.
racing with this because I mean, I think when I first learned about play to earn gaming, Pokemon was like the first thing that came to mind. I was like, oh my God, imagine if our Pokemon were immutable assets that we could move from one game to another. Like imagine if your Charizard
And, like,
back
tradable
from
and stuff.
yeah, like imagine if your Charizard from Pokemon Blue, could be moved through all the games and kind of held on. Like think of the sentimental value.
Yeah.
And then think about like actual value because some of these Pokemon very difficult to get the right EVs, IVs, train up properly. Well, now they could be traded.
It's not just that. What if, like in the past, imagine if they had a blockchain system throughout the history of Pokemon and all these like limited edition Pokemon events that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Nintendo held limited edition Pokemon events and not just in particular countries either.
Yep.
So there were people who've like traveled all the way across the world just to get these limited edition Pokemon assets that are in their games.
Yep.
But if those were all NFTs and were usable in future projects and just, you know what I mean, still sort of kept relevant inside of their in their system, I guess, with a blockchain background, those things would be worth a boatload of money
Yes.
now. And even now, if you find a cartridge of a Pokemon game where the person who owned the cartridge before has legitimately collected a limited edition Pokemon from a Pokemon event or something,
It's worth a
a
lot.
lot of money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because people really covet that stuff. So
And we've seen Pokemon kind of take advancements with technology. Like look at them working with Niantic and AR and Pokemon Go, and like they've
Yeah.
always kind of been pushing. And I mean, they're such a large studio.
well, and now with the mobile market and with the
Yep.
the Pokemon Unite thing, they're doing. Tencent made a fantastic game for them, which is absolutely
Mm-hmm.
addictive and is very conducive to a Web3
It is.
framework. So it's not hard for me to imagine them making a game not unlike Pokemon Unite that would be Web3 based.
I mean, so many different types of games. We've seen them move into different genres like MOBA and like Pokemon Go, which had a whole different battle system in the AR.
Yeah.
And then even the traditional Pokemon has kind of evolved a bit to like open world and
That's
stuff.
right.
So I'm confident knowing that we've seen Pokemon in general, that company, do use the new technologies that are available.
Okay, and lastly, and almost most importantly, they've proven that they can make stable cross-platform connections between
Yes.
mobile games and the Nintendo Switch,
Mm-hmm.
which leads me to like my next point. If they're going to be creating, NFT assets that are Nintendo Switch related that are now going to be cross-platform,
gonna push
playable
these
on
companies.
the mobile market is a huge lucrative market, and
Yep.
they've already proven that they're very receptive to Pokemon. So
I agree.
so
I'm
that
excited.
could create a lot of value for the whole crypto, world, let alone just Pokemon themselves. You know what I mean?
So, I mean, that definitely gets me excited to see Pokemon taking leaps and bounds because we need these big titles, these big projects to kind of push the envelope forward. I mean, especially with everything that's going on right now. And I think a good counterpoint to bring up is kind of some other things like Disney recently laying off like
That is such a
7,000 people.
weird move.
They-
Not
their
super
whole
surprising
metaverse.
to me though, because when they decided they were going to work with they think they said they were going to work with Polygon.
Yes.
They decided that was back in 2022 when things had just like the bull run had just happened and everything was looking pretty great. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so now the winter's been pretty long and there's been all this stuff going on between the government and banks that are holders of crypto or that are safe havens for crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that and the government taking their stance, I think on crypto, Disney has sided in stance with the government.
It's kind of
on
what I'm
most
thinking
things.
because like Nvidia
Um,
kind of comes up too. Like the CEO of Nvidia recently released a statement saying that crypto doesn't add any value to society, and it's like, wait, didn't you just make record-breaking profits from all your GPUs?
Yeah, that was a little
mining.
silly. But if you think about it, also on that not to be the devil's advocate, but I am a little bit. He didn't really have a choice there. You know what I mean? His company was creating the best GPUs on the block, so whether or not he was an advocate for crypto while it was happening,
Didn't
it
even
was going to
matter.
happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it's great you can voice your opinion now. Oh, I don't think that, cryptocurrency is useful for anybody or it's useful to society. Well, that's not going to change the fact that you still make great GPUs, and those GPUs can still be used for mining. So whether you like it or not, unless you take down your business because you don't like crypto, then you're not really proving your point. You
Yeah,
know what I
it's
mean?
just really weird because like any amount of research into Bitcoin or crypto, you wouldn't say that. You'd understand the applications for third world countries, the need for decentralized currency, the bringing redistribution of wealth. Like people in Western society kind of look at it as a technology or like a tech boom. But
Yeah,
what
it's
they're often
a new
missing,
product.
yeah, but what they're often missing is like, well, what about countries like Zimbabwe or Indonesia or, anywhere that has had Turkey, Venezuela, massive inflation or government corruption, stealing people's money? Well, if you've got Bitcoin, that solves that.
Well, in the last bull run kind of proved that if you create through cryptocurrency a little like wormhole where a faucet that happens to be targeted a North American audience is now accessible to the entire world via crypto, you have these Brazilians and Filipino people and people from a whole bunch of different countries that are in countries like that where the dollar goes really far. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They're able to earn enough money to bring their like quality of life up, and like governments around the world are like, no, cryptocurrency is bad. Nobody deserves to have this. And it's almost, to me, it almost seems like they're trying to reinforce the gap in wealth between these countries. Like,
Yes.
no, we shouldn't have a way for them to alleviate the wealth gap. That's wrong. That's bad. That's what I see. And I'm not 100% the most omniscient person in the entire world. So I wonder that people who are less able to understand what's going on there than I am, if they're seeing the same thing. You know what I mean?
Well, it's really interesting you bring that up. This is a good point to talk about El Salvador a little bit because the way developing versus developed nations work is developing countries basically take out massive loans from banks, and the banks get to dictate the terms of that repayment, which is essentially what keeps these countries in developing and
That's
doesn't
right.
allow them to become
That's
a
right.
developed nation. So it really kind of controls the power structure of poor and rich and all the wealth. Well, what El Salvador decided to do was create these volcano bonds. So instead of needing to go to a bank to borrow money, anyone in the world can now invest in these volcano bonds, which is the money that they will use to grow their country. So for the first time ever, we're actually seeing a
Right.
model that's independent from that banking route. And that got me really kind of interested in learning a little bit more about El Salvador. And it was like, okay, well, what's behind these volcano bonds? And they're talking about building Bitcoin City, which is really interesting. So no
Bitcoin
property
City.
tax, no income tax, no corporate tax, like no tax. And it looks like basically, and I mean, they're already hiring architects, engineers, developers, construction people. Like that's already happening. They just had like a massive job fair a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
So like we know this is actually moving forward. It's not just purely conceptual. Whether or not it actually happens is still yet to be known. But for me, it looks like it's going to be the new Singapore or the new Dubai, and it's going to be a safe haven for crypto investors and particularly crypto businesses. And I mean, the tax incentives alone are massive. I mean, think about Canada here. We're one of the highest tax countries in the world. And, nobody likes paying taxes. It's just kind of a cost of your citizenship, I guess you could say.
That's right.
We need infrastructure. We need roads. We need street signs. We need
Which
schools.
is
We
why
need
taxes are
education.
important if
Right.
they're allocated properly.
Exactly, but by using these volcano bonds and allowing people to invest in the country, well, now they're not at the whim of these debt issues with the banks and the repayments. It's like they can actually use the money to do things
Yeah,
to
they're not just
allow
paying interest to some bank.
no tax and stuff like that. So I mean, there was a lot of people who moved to El Salvador back when the vaccine stuff was going on, just because they wanted to have somewhere else to live and kind of freedom of personal health rights. I won't really talk about that much here. But that kind of started the influx of people going there, and then
Okay.
the president of El Salvador just was the one who announced the whole Bitcoin City a little while ago. I think
I
it was
see.
almost a year ago. So that's got me kind of curious, like kind of in a roundabout way, what we're seeing now with like what happened with the Silicon Valley Bank, the USDC
Yeah, that's a big piece of
depegging.
news that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on a little
Right.
bit because they're like, well, okay, well they closed the bank and then they bought it out and everybody's fine, right? Well, everybody's fine, but
It already caused, I mean, USDC to depeg, which once
let's
again
talk about that a little bit.
brings more scrutiny to stablecoins because stablecoins are backed to real dollars. And obviously, if your treasury or a certain percentage of your reserve is in a bank that literally gets shut down, well, what happens? It's going to depeg. It's pretty straightforward.
So basically, you're saying the Silicon Valley Bank had a bunch of USDC and
Yes.
American dollars to back that USDC, and when the American dollars were seized, that USDC was no longer pegged to currency
That's
anymore.
right. That's
and
why
that
we've seen the
caused
depeg.
the depeg of
Right.
USDC. Okay, I understand now.
Yes. So, I mean, there's still USDT, and that's kind of like where I think I seen something recently. It was like $10 billion worth of USDC has been exited in the last
I've heard a
30
couple
days.
of people like in memes kind of say that USDT is like the last bastion of safety. You know
Yes.
what I mean?
But of course, don't you think they're going to go after that?
Well, so my opinion on this is a little bit mixed. So ultimately, it seems like the true last bastion for the crypto investor is actually Bitcoin, and the reason why that
I
is
agree.
because it's truly decentralized. So
Yep.
the real question here is how decentralized is USDT?
Good question. It's not really because it's a stable coin. It's ran by a company
That's
and
right.
it's pegged through dollars held in a bank. But what these crypto companies did is there was these banks in North America, like the Silicon Valley one, that was willing to work with crypto companies. So it's kind of like a safe haven for
Yeah, so
crypto
my question
projects.
is my real question is that is USDT backed in a similar fashion, and exactly how is that working? Because that will give us some insight as to whether or
Absolutely,
not
it
there will be an
has to be.
avenue for the American
Because
government to
where
try to
else are
interfere
they
with that.
holding their money? Like
Right.
they need those American dollars
Right.
somewhere to be able to say, well, yes, for every stable coin, it's back to one. So it has to be held somewhere,
Unless it was privately held someplace, which is not likely, to be completely honest with you.
No, and I don't even know if they're able to do that,
Or if that's a legal thing
or
to
if
do
that's a
in the
legal
United
thing to
States.
do.
Yeah,
But I
so-
do know that a lot of crypto projects are fleeing to Swiss banks, which is also interesting because I've even heard some issues about Swiss banks going on with
So
crypto and
yes,
stuff
that
too.
brings me to my next point, the whole Credit Suisse thing that just happened
Yes.
recently. There's a bank called Credit Suisse, and there was some nonsense about them having a disagreement with one of their biggest investors, who I believe is a Saudi Arabian prince or somebody along those lines. And then he decided to pull his investments out of that bank, and as because he did that, their stocks plummeted a little bit, and because that happened, a lot of their other investors decided to pull some money out of their bank.
Cascade
And
effect.
and there was a cascade effect, and they're a well-known bank for people who want to keep their assets, outside of the United States or outside of Canada or outside of other countries where they might have to worry about their tax laws and things like
Yep.
that, which is something they probably wouldn't talk about a whole lot. But that happening to Credit Suisse leads a lot of people to believe that all of the regular bank systems are at risk here.
Yeah, I know,
You
it's
what I
really
mean?
interesting. And then when you talk to a lot of quote unquote experts in the industry or stuff, a lot of their opinion is saying this is why Bitcoin is so important. This is actually showing the world the issues with some of the banking systems and how Bitcoin is really kind of the safe haven. And then
is a
it
fact.
got me thinking about like, well, pegging things to Bitcoin, which they've talked about before, or like a lot of these crypto projects, what they generally do when they receive investments or when they receive their funding, let's say they raised $8 million or $2 million, they'll hold that in stablecoins.
Which is a safe
Right?
thing to do if stablecoins are in fact
Correct.
stable.
So now that calls into question, well, if these stablecoins are at risk, what happens to these projects' treasury? They're at risk.
That's
So now the whole industry kind of has this like, oh shit moment where it's like, well, what do we do? Do we take our stablecoins, invest in Bitcoin because that's actually the safest route? But then now your income in your treasury is based on the market fluctuations of Bitcoin, and that just might be what has to happen. But then I also think about, well, if projects start deciding to do that, guess what's going to happen to the price of Bitcoin?
It's going to skyrocket.
That's right, because now all this money that's been held in stablecoins for so long is going to shift over.
So, and this is another thing that I think is interesting, because then you'll see this like rise in valuation of the crypto market. People are like, where did all this money come from? I don't understand. The crypto market wasn't worth this much before, and it's because of this the USDT that was pegged to a particular coin, and which shows the value of $1, no matter how vast the liquidity might be in the USDT or USDC. It'll always show a value of $1, which the regular person goes, okay, it's not fluctuating, that's good. You know what I mean? But if all of that suddenly comes out and it still shows a value of $1, but now you've got $1 billion or $1 trillion that have come out, well, the value of other things that are volatile are going to go up or go down
That's
accordingly.
right. But it also adds inherent risk because, like, what about when Bitcoin goes down again? Because it always will. Everything, will fluctuate. We're not going to get a sideways chart forever. That's what stablecoins do. So then these projects, if they're invested in Bitcoin or their treasuries in Bitcoin, what they can accomplish or do is going to be based a bit on the price of Bitcoin. Now, that is a risky move for a business to be like, yeah, all of our investments fluctuate and all of our capital fluctuates.
Well, it kind of leads me to believe that one of two things will happen. You'll have either this like mass sort of adoption of probably Bitcoin, because it is the true decentralized thing that everybody trusts. Bitcoin will go up massively, and the traditional world will be talking about it like, oh my gosh, look at the price of Bitcoin. Why don't we invest in Bitcoin?
Yep.
And then it might trigger another bull run. Or the second thing might happen where there'll be some other solution that people will use with their projects to keep their
That's
treasuries
right.
and to keep their
Yeah.
and so that might happen in the future or
Or safe
maybe
havens, certain
you know what I mean.
banks in certain countries might have different regulations and laws, so they can kind of cloak to be that, safe haven. But it's interesting because if we talk about, this is a good segue to some of the other stuff that's going on right now with all the exchanges. So like Coinbase, Binance, there's been some other ones too, some smaller ones now, but basically the
I think
SEC is
Sushi
going
Swap is
after
one of
them.
them.
Sushi Swap, yeah, they're going after them, saying, well, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin, these are all securities, and it's like, well, to me, how does that even work?
You
Because
look at the
Bitcoin is
definition of a security, and it's like a security. You need a certificate for a thing,
to
but
say you own it, but
to
it's like,
say
well,
that you own
Bitcoin's
it.
decentralized, so it's like they're kind of lumping it into this category that doesn't even fit with the technology, which kind of shows a lack of understanding. But at the same time, I have to understand, well, the government doesn't know what to do. So it probably is, and this is just my guess, of course, easier to just say, let's lump it over here.
So that we can have a legal context of what to do with it.
Right. So I understand, like, I've talked about this before. I'm pro regulation in the sense that that's how all the retail money is going to come into the system.
Okay, but
Once
that's
the
really
framework,
interesting to me because Binance has constantly reported that they've been in regular talks with regulators in the United States.
That's right.
So why would they be in regular talks with regulators in the United States and then suddenly the regulators would turn their back on them and just decide to shut them down?
Good question. My opinion is rather than creating the new framework and need it to do that, it was easier just to be like, let's lump it over here. Right. And there could obviously be a lot more factors at play that we don't know about. I mean, we've heard whispers of like the centralized digital currencies.
So
And
it sounds to
stuff like
me
that
with
too.
the whole Silicon Valley Bank thing that when the United States government shut that bank down, depegged the currency, and then bought the bank back, they just sort of gained control of basically 11% of or whatever.
Maybe, and it
the
was kind of like a
difference whatever
bailout.
the you know what I mean. So are they now in control of like a pretty large sum of USDC? Is that what's happening right now, or
Good
are
question.
they considering that traditional money in the form of securities and trying to sell
Yeah,
it
they
somehow,
talked
or
about
what exactly are they
selling
doing
off.
with the USDC now that they own it? If
They
own
talked
it.
about selling off some of it and like investors. That's kind of what the bailout was, is like, hey, if you had money in here, you're still going to get some of your money or most of your money. But then there was also this, and I kind of want to be careful saying this because I'm not exactly sure of the details, but it said that there was like 98 million being held to be resold and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, like, isn't that what happens when they seize assets and like go after somebody and then they resell it? Kind of like if you
Yeah,
were.
but so if the
I'm
assets are
confused with that.
cryptocurrency, the only way they could resell it, quote unquote, is if they put it out for
Back
sale
into
in the
the
crypto
market.
market, which means that they'd be interfacing with the crypto market, a thing they don't want to interface with, and they don't.
And maybe there's a lot more
So
behind the scenes. That's what I
that
mean.
just-
We're
yeah.
not getting all the
I'm not
details.
fully under grasping what the agenda is of the government in closing that bank just yet, but
Yeah.
I'm
And I
sure,
should clarify, when I say pro regulation, I mean done in a right way. There's
Yeah.
definitely right and wrong ways.
of course.
But the reason why we haven't seen a lot of retail and large hedge funds really deploy trillions of their dollars here is because it's a high risk asset, is what's
Yeah,
considered.
this sort of thing keeps happening.
And we're kind of seeing it. We're seeing this back and forth. All of a sudden, exchanges are going after the SECs. It's like, so people don't want to be putting their trillions of dollars into something that they're uncertain of what it means legally. So that's why we need the regulations. We need these kind of a line drawn in the sand to say, this is what it is. This is how it works. Great. Now that we have that framework, we can operate within that framework, where it seems like they're just kind of scrambling right now and being like, oh, let's just throw it in the security bucket. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense with the nature of the technology. So like,
Which
if
to
you
me says they just want to reject it altogether instead of trying to understand it.
maybe, or find a way to gain control back, because decentralized currency is actually a risk to the petrodollar. It is a risk to kind of the financial system and everything that's set up.
Yeah.
So instead of them promoting it, which I find really interesting, because back when the internet boom happened, North America did the opposite thing. They were like, hey, companies come here, we're going to promote this, we're going to become like the technological hub of the world. And it was huge. It was actually a big reason for a lot of the success of America and Canada.
And Silicon Valley in
and
the first
Silicon
place.
Valley in the first place. And now we have crypto, kind of the next opportunity, and it seems like they're taking the opposite route, where it's like they're trying to figure out, how do we stop it? How do we control it? And then you look at, there's different countries around the world that are kind of pro crypto, pro Bitcoin, and it's not just El Salvador. There are other ones out there. And usually there's a lot of tax benefits. But I think about like the land rush that used to happen back in like 1700s, early 1900s, where they'd be like, hey, move to our country, we'll give you free land. It's kind of feeling like that a little bit with Bitcoin. Like El Salvador actually made Bitcoin the national currency, legal tender.
Wow.
So you can go up to a little street vendor to buy street food and pay with Bitcoin.
That's pretty
So
interesting.
It is. So businesses are supposed to basically allow the acceptance of Bitcoin as a form of payment.
Right.
That's really cool to me.
That is cool to me.
And
also.
I mean, when you take a look at what's happening down there, quality of life is going up. They've gotten rid of tons of the crime. There was like giant mass arrests of 5,000 gang members earlier. And like El Salvador used to be the murder capital of the world. And now with new statistics coming out, it's debatably the safest place in the world. So to see that dramatic shift and change really kind of got me interested in learning, well, what are they doing down there? And it's all about Bitcoin, decentralization. And it's like, well, they seem to be pro Bitcoin. And to me, I would want to be around people that are envisioning a better tomorrow, not worrying about things blowing up in flames. And nothing against Canada, but I feel like a lot of the general consensus in society around here is doom and gloom. We're not talking about how exciting it's going to be to move into the next couple of years.
The honest truth is
like
that a lot of what I think relating to crypto specifically is that a lot of Canadians are like, we don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole right now because we're not sure about it.
That's right. And it's the same thing. It's the not having that framework, not having the regulatory stuff in place. So you're getting a lot of like demonization of the technology. And we kind of, it's kind of funny that when you look back over history, us humans, you'd think we have learned this lesson, but we obviously haven't. Anytime something new comes out, it's always demonized.
Generally, before it's
even
before
the kaleidoscope was demonized when the kaleidoscope was first invented.
Think about Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons was demonized a lot in the 70s and 80s, and now it's
television.
I think it's the American national pastime in prisons now. It's the most played game that prisoners in American prisons play.
Which game is that?
Dungeons and Dragons.
No, well,
I'm not making that up.
Makes sense. It's a board game. So I mean, it seems to be kind of human nature for any new technology for us to be like, that's bad, that's evil. But at the same time, it doesn't stop the technology.
Well,
right? I mean, the technology is still
NVIDIA
advancing.
saying that he doesn't agree with NVIDIA, or that he doesn't agree with cryptocurrency being, or that think that it's useful in society. It doesn't change the fact that his video cards are going to be used for mining. So
that's right.
If he really if he really believes that mining needs to stop, then he needs to stop making the tool that people use to mine.
That's right. But then there's a lot of other interesting questions that come up too. Like just kind of backtrack a little bit with like the securities thing is like, well, does that mean talking about crypto can be a fallacy? Does that mean like there's just so many questions that come up where it's like, where is this going? And
there was like litigation against Binance US. Is there going to be litigation against Binance Canada? Like that's a problem.
Yes. Coinbase, and I mean, there's a lot of hearsay stuff. You can tell like some of the news, it's all partitioned and there's different agendas to different parts of the news. But like there was one recently that Coinbase was like, we're going to try to stay in Canada, but chances are Binance won't. And it's like, it's very interesting because for me as a Canadian, Binance, in my opinion, was where I had most of my confidence. I was like, well, these guys are the biggest, seems the safest. I still don't recommend anyone keep money on exchanges.
They were the platform that I used to purchase cryptocurrency first, and they made it the easiest for me to do so. So I've always used them as my, if I ever wanted to get fiat into cryptocurrency, that's the place that I generally would do it.
Right? Because it's easy.
Because it was easy there.
Through the business, same thing. And but it kind of just reiterates again, like if you're holding crypto, put it on a hardware wallet, a cold wallet. Don't keep it on an exchange. More people are figuring this out. And I seen a recent poll where they were showing it was like only 3 out of 10 people are doing that. So most people are still keeping their money on hot wallets or like MetaMask or in exchanges. Right. And it's like, if you're holding even a substantial amount whatsoever, I would say anything over $1,000, like it's at risk when it's not in your hardware wallet or being stored yourself.
Yeah, because people can definitely track you using your computer.
Gemini, FTX, I mean, all these exchanges literally just went, no more withdrawals. So now your money is gone, right? So it's like, it kind of shows that the power needs to be in your hands. But I do want to see regulation and stuff kind of figured out because it's going to be important to know. I'm sure there's going to be some scary moments and some uncertainty. I mean, that's how markets go. But I do know ultimately, just kind of like the internet, this technology is going to push forward. I mean, we see so many use cases with like real estate stuff that's being implemented on host deeds and NFTs for birth certificates and passports. And like to say that the technology doesn't serve... Even. That's right. So to say that Bitcoin or crypto doesn't serve society doesn't make any sense to me. The technology has so many applications, and we probably haven't even figured out 90% of it.
It's literally been taught in schools, in universities for like comp sci students for the last 15, 20 years. They're like, this is going to be the next emerging technology. You need to know it. This is how the logic base works.
Yeah.
And so when we went to college, like, hey, nobody uses this technology yet, but we're teaching it to you because it is the next thing.
Yeah. So people understand that, especially people in the industry. So it's just interesting to see what's happening right now, what's going on. And then I guess a good point is, even with all this FUD, the market is still growing a bit because it's giving confidence back to people to be like, okay, Bitcoin, that's the thing. Like that's where we need to put our confidence and our trust because we know we can. But then also, the country you live in might matter too. Like, if crypto becomes more restrict, if it really is a security and there's all these other things, like I'm going to leave, right? Because I want to live in a world that's promoting a better tomorrow, not worried about everything breaking down and falling.
That makes sense.
And luckily, people have the freedom to do that. You can move wherever you want in the world. And I do see maybe some more countries. Actually, I even just heard Hong Kong is going to try to pass some policies to become crypto friendly. So maybe some things like El Salvador, where they're going to have no taxes for businesses and like all kinds of incentives. So it's like, I do feel like this is an opportunity for a lot of countries to kind of shift the power, shift the wealth. Because if North America and, Europe and Australia, New Zealand, these countries aren't getting on board, they're going to fall behind. It's just that simple. Right. So it's like, how do you address that in a politically correct and socially appropriate way that can actually benefit the people, that doesn't just take away more freedoms?
And also, if we have like a make nice relationship with regulators and cryptocurrency as opposed to like an adversarial relationship, when the next bull run happens, it's going to make everything a lot easier for everybody.
It really will.
And I was kind of hoping that it would be done by now and the next bull run would be happening soon. But I don't.
We got to work all this stuff out.
I don't think that regulation is a requisite for the next bull run to happen. But I would like to think that we will have a stronger bull run, the next bull run, if there's regulation in place when it happens.
That's right.
And I would like to promote that. And so if anybody here is watching, I would like to state my opinion that I think regulation is a good thing, but it needs to be done with everybody's head in the space.
Yep.
So that the right conclusions can be made. And so that when we have this next bull run and when the water is flowing again, it all goes to the right place.
And it's simpler to understand. It's just like trading stocks and stuff like that. Like there's regulations in place and there's rules, and that's great. And people know how to play by the rules, and it works. Well, works, I guess. I don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole, but we know what the rules are and how to operate under it. If we can have that for crypto, it'll make things a lot easier.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for discussing this. I thought this was a great conversation piece for everybody because there is a lot.
Thank you for having me. There were pieces of news in there that even I didn't know about.
Yeah, right. So I hope you guys all found this useful as well. There's so much news going on in the last couple weeks here that I want to kind of touch on some things. As we mentioned, this is just our opinion, and we're getting second-rate information just like you guys are from the news, but it's a really interesting time to be in crypto right now, and I'm really excited for where it's all going to come to. I know sometimes it can seem a little scary, stuff with banks, stuff with these exchanges, but the truth is all of this has to be figured out for us to kind of carve that path forward.
Uncomfortable is good. Right? Uncomfortable is the way forward.
Yeah. So thanks so much for joining us today, and until next time, cheers. Don't forget about our 1,000 subscriber giveaway where you can win $200, and if you need more information, be sure to join us on our Discord. See you there.